The shuttle touched down on the gleaming pad with a hiss of vented gases, and the hatch opened with ceremonial slowness. Lieutenant Hugo Sinclair stepped out first, his boots clicking against the polished stone, the long folds of his barrister's robes brushing the deck as though this alien courthouse were simply another hall in London. Behind him, 8 Marines filed out in perfect formation, each burdened not with weapons crates but with reinforced containers stuffed with thick legal tomes, reference pads, and scrolls of annotated regulations. Their rifles were slung, locked, their postures neutral, but their eyes roved constantly, taking in every balcony and shadow of the grand plaza before the court. Hugo carried a slim folio under one arm and a fountain pen in his other hand. The air smelled faintly of copper and hot ozone, a reminder that this was a station built by a species who thought differently about comfort and style. He did not allow the heat or the curious stares of alien merchants to ruffle him. He adjusted his robes with a deft tug, ensuring the old earth-cut cloth still draped properly, and moved toward the tall obsidian arch that served as the entrance. 2 attendants in rust-colored tabards awaited him. They were tall and thin, jointed like mantises, their compound eyes clicking and refracting the station's light. One of them raised a tablet and began speaking in quick, clicking syllables that the translator in Hugo's ear rendered into trade standard. "You are the human advocate? You may leave your armed escort outside. The court is a place of peace." Hugo gave a faint, apologetic smile, the kind that centuries of British diplomacy had perfected. "They are Marines, not merely an escort. The Admiralty insists on their presence. They will remain entirely unobtrusive, I assure you." The attendant tilted its head, chittered something to the other, then gestured them through. Hugo walked with the same unhurried pace, the Marines keeping step, their boots echoing in the high-vaulted entrance hall. The ceiling soared away above, strung with strands of pulsing blue light, and galleries of alien spectators peered down through latticed screens. Inside the great hall, the temperature was even hotter, though a breeze stirred from vents in the walls. Hugo paused at a service alcove, where a nervous junior attendant sat behind a console. "Might one trouble you for a pot of tea?" Hugo asked, as if they were in a seaside tea room instead of a foreign court. The attendant blinked, consulted a menu of refreshments, then with an uncertain nod tapped out the request. "Excellent," Hugo said, opening his folio and scanning lines of handwritten notes in his neat sloping script. He checked his citations, tapped his pen thoughtfully against his lip, and murmured a few Latin tags under his breath, rehearsing. When the tea arrived in a tall, steaming cylinder, pale green and unfamiliar, Hugo accepted it with a gracious nod, took a small sip, and set it beside him. He stepped forward into the chamber proper, noting the arrangement of benches and the oval platform in the center where the accused was to be presented. At present, a shimmering field covered that platform, and inside it floated a translucent container. Within that container, curled and bound, was the defendant, a cephalopod, its limbs folded tightly, its chromatophores dull with distress. The presiding magistrates, 5 of them, sat on a raised dais at the far end. Their robes were angular, patterned with metallic threads, and their expressions, or whatever passed for them, remained inscrutable. At a table to the left sat the prosecution, 3 alien advocates conferring in sharp whispers. Hugo took his place at the opposing table, arranged his notes, and clasped his hands behind his back. The magistrate in the center spoke first, voice filtered through the court's amplification system. "We convene this hearing to review the matter of disputed cargo aboard merchant vessel Vadra's Hope. Prosecution, state your claim." One of the alien advocates rose, his crest twitching. "Honored magistrates, the cargo in question is a biological specimen classified as livestock under Section 4 of the Interstellar Commerce Codex. The trader acquired it lawfully." Hugo stood, the movement smooth and deliberate. He set his pen down, smoothed the front of his robes, and stepped forward with an air of calm precision. "Your Honors," he began, his voice cutting cleanly across the chamber, "I rise to make a preliminary motion before this proceeding continues." The prosecution paused, antennae tilting, the magistrates exchanging glances. "I submit," Hugo continued, "that this being cannot be regarded as cargo. Under the long-established principle of Habeas Corpus, a foundational doctrine of Earth law, it is required that any living being detained must be presented as a body before the court, and that said being cannot be treated as chattel." A ripple of confusion spread across the dais. The chief magistrate shifted. This is a cargo dispute, human advocate. The law is clear. With the court's permission, Hugo said, producing a slim leather volume from his folio, I shall cite precedent. Somerset v. Stewart, 1772, Earth Common Law. The judgment reads, in translation, the air of England is too pure for a slave to breathe. This precedent established beyond dispute that no living, thinking being may be considered property under Earth jurisdiction. As the Galactic Federation recognizes Earth's legal sovereignty within this cluster, and as this court sits under the aegis of Federation law, I submit that such a principle applies here. The translators buzzed. Whispers erupted among the spectators. One of the prosecution advocates raised a claw. These words, they have no standing here. Hugo smiled faintly. On the contrary, by ratification of the Federation Charter, your own codes incorporate the sovereignty of member states. Earth law prohibits the classification of sentient life as cargo. I therefore demand that the court produce the being before us, not as property, but as a person whose rights must be addressed. The murmuring grew louder, a susurration of disbelief and consternation. Magistrates leaned together, their robes rustling, mandibles clicking. A clerk scrambled to access databases. The cephalopod in its container stirred faintly, as if sensing a shift in its fortune. Behind Hugo, the Marines stood immobile, their faces expressionless, rifles slung but hands near grips. The weight of their presence was not lost on the court. The prosecutor tried to speak again, but Hugo held up a hand in courteous interruption. Habeas corpus, he repeated calmly. The body must be produced. That is my motion, your honors. I await your ruling. The chamber filled with whispers, the air electric with sudden uncertainty. Hugo, unruffled, took another sip of the strange green tea and waited. The magistrate sat in silent astonishment as Hugo placed the thick, leather-bound volume onto the testimony stand. Its gilt-edged pages glimmered faintly under the chamber's strange lighting. This, he said calmly, is the Codex of Earth Common Law. It is customary that witnesses swear upon it to speak truth. I see no reason why the custom cannot be observed here, especially if your honors wish for these proceedings to carry weight beyond your own walls. The chief magistrate's mandibles clacked in surprise. This is not in our procedures. Hugo nodded gently as though explaining something obvious to a particularly dense junior clerk. Indeed, but your charter allows each member world's legal practices to be respected within the framework of shared law. To ignore it would risk invalidating your own ruling. I submit that witnesses swear on this text or risk an appeal. There was a ripple through the chamber. One of the alien advocates began to protest, but faltered under Hugo's steady gaze. A clerk was sent scurrying to search the relevant clauses. In the gallery, a low hum of conversation spread, curious faces peering over rails to watch the strange human and his even stranger demands. Hugo accepted another sip of tea, then rose again. I thank the court for indulging me. Now in the matter of precedent. Somerset v. Stewart, Earth year 1772, which I cited earlier, offers guidance. He opened the book and turned the pages with deliberate care, as though handling a sacred relic. The ruling states that the classification of a living, reasoning being as property is impermissible. To place this in your trade law terms, imagine classifying a bonded cargo ship as a lump of ore. Illogical, yes? The ship has a registry. It is recognized under interstellar convention as an entity. The same applies here. The being in that containment field is not cargo. It is an entity. The alien prosecution team exchanged rapid, hushed words. Their translator units sputtered and reprocessed Hugo's phrasing as if even the machines struggled with the concepts. Hugo continued unperturbed. Injunctions follow. Here, he withdrew a stack of handwritten orders, each stamped with an earth seal in bright wax, are formal filings. This one bars the movement of the defendant without my consent. This one prohibits destruction or alteration of records during deliberation. This one mandates the presence of a certified translator for any further questioning. You will find all of them in line with Federation procedural norms. One of the bailiffs, confused but eager to obey his own magistrates, stepped forward as though to remove the stack from Hugo's hand. A Marine shifted slightly, blocking the path with a crate of reference texts. Stand clear, friend, the Marine said in calm, precise trade standard. Earth legal documents remain with the advocate until admitted to the court. The bailiff hesitated, then retreated, clicking to his fellows in agitation. Hugo thanked the Marine with a slight nod and placed the injunctions neatly on the table before him. The magistrates whispered among themselves, the center one finally lifting a claw. "Human advocate, these filings are irregular. The hearing will proceed without them." Hugo shook his head slowly. "With respect, Your Honors, these filings are admissible under Federation Charter Article 9, Section 3. You yourselves ratified the clause regarding member legal frameworks." He retrieved a slim black tablet from his folio and activated it. A holographic text scrolled upward, written in the dense glyphs of the Federation's founding documents. Hugo read aloud, translating as he went, his voice even, carrying easily in the chamber. "No member world shall deny the application of sovereign legal custom where it does not conflict with the Charter itself. I ask this court plainly, in what way do my filings conflict?" Silence answered him. The magistrates stared, their antennae and crests twitching in irritation. The gallery hummed louder now, aliens of varied species craning their necks or adjusting sensory nodes to catch every word. Hugo closed the tablet and folded his hands. "Until I hear such a conflict articulated, these injunctions stand." The chief magistrate's tone grew sharper. "You seek to turn this court into a theater of your planet's quaint rituals. This is not Earth." "No," Hugo agreed softly. "But Earth is a Federation member in good standing, and your own commerce treaties apply to us all. To ignore them would invite diplomatic protest and, I suspect, far more paperwork than anyone here would enjoy." The magistrate slammed a claw down. "Enough. Bailiffs, remove this human so the hearing may continue." Two heavily built guards advanced from the side doors, their weapons hanging from broad straps, their gait purposeful. The Marines moved as one, a subtle step forward that sent a ripple of unease through the court. Their rifles remained at low ready, safeties still on, but the message was clear. The sergeant, a square-jawed man with a voice like Iron Mike, spoke in level tones. "By order of Earth law, none shall touch the advocate while he addresses the court." The guards slowed, uncertain, glancing at the magistrates. Hugo stood very still, his gaze steady, his hands resting lightly on the worn cover of the law book. The tension in the chamber was palpable, a sharp intake of collective breath as everyone waited to see who would make the next move. In the gallery above, murmurs swept through the crowd, the aliens fascinated, appalled, and oddly entertained by the sight of a single human twisting their vaunted legal machine into knots with nothing more than old words and calm resolve. The magistrates conferred again, mandibles rattling, their crests lowering in private discussion. The clicking voices overlapped in a staccato rhythm as they reviewed his filings and whispered among themselves. The gallery's hum swelled and receded like a tide as they waited, eyes fixed on the dais. At length the chief magistrate straightened and intoned, "The court has reviewed the advocate's motion and filings. State your closing argument before we render our decision." Hugo inclined his head. "Your Honors, you are generous." He stepped forward, the folds of his robe trailing against the smooth stone floor, his voice measured, polite, and clear. "I submit that if this court persists in classifying a sentient being as cargo, you do not merely risk an error of judgment, you invite a precedent that undermines the very fabric of the Federation Charter you swore to uphold. Article 9, Section 3 binds us all, and to flout it would be to proclaim that this jurisdiction stands apart, a rogue port where rights are negotiable." He turned a page in his notes, the rustle faint against the hushed air. Centuries ago on Earth, a similar question arose. Somerset versus Stewart, 1772. The Lord Chief Justice ruled that no being could be treated as property without explicit positive law. He found no such law and freed the man. Today you find yourselves in that same position. There is no positive law here to justify enslavement. There is only the charter you have signed. A ripple of unrest moved through the prosecutor's table, but Hugo pressed on, his tone never rising. "Consider the cost of ignoring that truth. Trade partners will question your integrity. Diplomatic envoys will lodge protests. Cases will be appealed, judgments overturned, and soon your ports will be shunned by those who fear seizure and bondage. I do not speak to threaten, Your Honors. I speak to warn, respectfully, that this court stands at a fork in the road." He closed the book with a soft thud. "Release the being. Uphold the charter. Show that this court honors the principles we all claim to share." Silence followed, deep and almost tangible. The magistrates bent their crests together again, whispering in rapid clicks. Above, the gallery murmured with growing astonishment, and Hugo stood motionless, hands clasped behind his back. At last the chief magistrate rose, tall and austere. The court, having considered the advocate's words and filings, rules that the specimen identified as cargo shall be recognized as sentient and free. It is ordered released to the custody of the human advocate. A susurration swept through the chamber, whispers and astonished trills bouncing from wall to wall. Hugo bowed slightly. "I thank your honors for their wisdom." He gathered his notes, slid the codex into his satchel, and turned toward the exit. The Marine stepped forward in perfect unison, forming a protective cordon around him as the containment unit holding the cephalopod was wheeled out, its shimmering field now inactive. The alien crowd parted. No one obstructed the path, though many leaned forward, chattering among themselves in disbelief. Hugo's expression remained calm, his stride even, as though walking a quiet garden path instead of the aftermath of a legal storm. Outside the courthouse, the air tasted of iron and engine fuel. The shuttle's ramp lowered with a hiss, and the Marines guided the cephalopod aboard. Hugo followed, pausing only to glance back at the grand arch of the courthouse. Then the hatch sealed, and the shuttle lifted with a soft vibration, leaving the courthouse and its shaken magistrates behind. In the ship's medbay, Hugo stood close as technicians eased the cephalopod into a specialized tank filled with oxygenated gel. Monitors blinked green as its chromatophores shifted from dull gray to tentative shades of blue and amber. "There now," Hugo murmured, watching a tentacle curl and uncurl in relief. "You are under Earth's protection now. No one shall call you cargo again." The Marines lingered nearby, watching the process with a mix of fascination and wariness. One of them, a broad-shouldered sergeant, muttered, "I've done boarding actions with less tension." Another grunted agreement. "Give me a firefight any day over lawyers and charters." Hugo offered them a thin smile. "Paperwork can be hazardous, gentlemen." He straightened his robes and stepped out of the medbay, his footsteps carrying him down a narrow corridor toward his quarters. The steady hum of the ship's engines was a familiar comfort. He entered his cabin, unclipped his satchel, and set the codex on his desk. A sheet of cream paper waited beside a pot of ink and his fountain pen. He sat, uncapped the pen, and began to write in careful lines, the words flowing with practiced grace. "Dear Sir, I am pleased to inform you that Habeas Corpus has now been established within the Andromeda cluster. The court, after due consideration, ruled in favor of the principal, and the being in question has been secured safely aboard." He paused to blot the ink, then continued. "There was some resistance, though no violence. The magistrates were persuaded by citations and by our interpretation of Article 9, Section 3. Please advise on dissemination of the ruling." Through the bulkhead, faint laughter and complaints filtered in. "You hear that, Jenkins? Nearly got shot over a squid in a jar. Mark my words, next time he asks for volunteers for a courthouse run, I'm on sick call." Hugo dipped his pen again, ignoring the banter, and added a Latin phrase beneath his signature. "Fiat justitia ruat caelum. Let justice be done though the heavens fall." He folded the paper, pressed it into a dispatch tube, and sealed it with a soft click. Outside, the hum of the engines continued steady and sure, carrying the ship and its strange cargo into open space, a single act of law already sending ripples far beyond the courtroom they had left behind.